They thought the war was far away, that the roaring fires of Europe could never touch the quiet shores of America. The Atlantic, vast and endless, seemed like a shield, an ocean that separated peace from chaos. But on a freezing January night in 1942, something moved silently beneath those same waves. Not a whale, not a storm. It was a machine, cold, metal, and merciless. A German U-boat. It slipped through the black water like a ghost, its engines humming quietly, its periscope breaking the surface to catch the faint glow of the American coast. Inside the cramped steel hull, German sailors held their breath. The captain whispered an order in German, "Tauchen. Prepare the torpedo." His eyes fixed on the periscope lens, watching the lights of ships that didn't yet know death was gliding toward them. The Americans were relaxed. It was early in 1942, barely a month after Pearl Harbor. Most believed the danger was still across the ocean. The East Coast glimmered with bright city lights, New York, Miami, Charleston, all shining into the sea like beacons. Merchant ships sailed with their deck lights on, music played on radios, and sailors smoked on deck, never imagining they were being watched from below. And then, the first strike came. The German U-boat's captain spotted a massive oil tanker, its hull gleaming in the moonlight. Through the periscope, he saw an easy target, unescorted, unarmed, and unaware. A low hiss filled the submarine as a torpedo launched into the dark water. Seconds later, the Atlantic exploded. The tanker was torn apart by fire. A column of flames shot into the sky. The explosion was so bright that people miles away on the beach saw it. Within minutes, oil slicks burned on the waves, painting the sea orange and red. Men screamed as they jumped overboard into burning water. The U-boat dove deep, escaping silently into the blackness while the ship vanished beneath the waves. That was the beginning of Operation Paukenschlag, the drumbeat. For the Germans, it was music. For the Americans, it was the start of a nightmare. Within days, other U-boats joined the hunt. They prowled along the East Coast, from North Carolina to New Jersey, sinking ship after ship. Their torpedoes struck tankers carrying fuel, freighters loaded with supplies, even passenger liners. The coastlines began to burn. People in seaside towns woke at night to strange thunder, distant booms that rolled across the ocean. At first, they thought it was a storm. Then came reports of wreckage washing ashore, lifeboats, oil barrels, bodies. Fishermen found floating debris, and sometimes, survivors clinging to wooden planks, their faces black with oil. In the restaurants and hotels along the Atlantic coast, diners could see the glow of fire far out at sea. Couples in New Jersey beaches watched orange flashes on the horizon, unaware they were watching lives end. The U-boats attacked with terrifying precision and disappeared before anyone could react. It was as if the ocean itself had turned against America. The U-boat commanders were ruthless but eerily calm. Inside their narrow, sweating metal hulls, they listened to the groans of their own ship as it dove deep. They heard explosions far above them, depth charges dropped by American patrols that came too late. The captains logged every sinking with military pride. For them, it was victory. For the men above the waves, it was horror. In one night alone, a U-boat sank 3 tankers within sight of the North Carolina coast. The flames stretched so wide that pilots in the sky reported seeing the fire from 50 miles away. The burning oil created black clouds that blocked the stars. The smell reached the beaches. Newspapers the next morning carried headlines that shocked the public: enemy subs attack off American coast. Ships burning in Atlantic, war comes to U.S. waters. Suddenly, fear spread like wildfire. Civilians began covering their windows with black curtains, turning off coastal lights so that German captains couldn't use them as navigation guides. But it was too late. The U-boats had already memorized every pattern, every shipping route. And the attacks continued. In February, a passenger ship called City of Atlanta was hit without warning. It sank in minutes. Out of 46 crew members, only 3 survived. They were found drifting days later, half dead from cold. Their story was terrifying. Torpedoed in the dark, the ship breaking in half, the sea filled with screams. The U-boat war had officially arrived at America's doorstep. From New England to Florida, the East Coast turned into a graveyard. More than 600 ships would eventually fall victim to these invisible hunters. Oil, coal, ammunition, and food supplies meant for Europe now lay at the bottom of the Atlantic. The United States had underestimated the reach of Hitler's navy. And the strangest part, the American cities along the coast never went dark at night. From their periscopes, U-boat crews could see the lights of Manhattan, the bright glow of boardwalks, the shimmering outline of the Statue of Liberty. One German captain wrote in his diary, "We could see New York City at night, bright and proud. It felt unreal, so close, so unaware. We were ghosts watching a sleeping giant." For weeks, they hunted freely. The U-boats became bold. Some came so close that their commanders could hear the faint hum of cars from the coastal roads. They surfaced at night to charge their batteries, their conning towers glistening under the moonlight. Sometimes they even floated near the beaches, invisible to the naked eye. It was a game of death and silence. American sailors, untrained and unprepared, faced panic at sea. They didn't yet know the tactics to counter submarines. Convoys weren't properly organized. Ships still sailed alone, easy targets. It was chaos. Meanwhile, the German U-boat crews celebrated each sinking with grim satisfaction. They were heroes in their homeland. But inside their submarines, life was far from glamorous. The air was stale. The temperature rose to unbearable heat. Food rotted. Sweat dripped from the ceiling. The smell of oil and metal filled every breath. And yet, they continued. Every night, the periscope rose, and new prey appeared. On land, Americans began to realize the danger. Oil from destroyed tankers washed ashore in black slicks, coating beaches in tar. Fishermen complained their nets came back full of corpses instead of fish. Coastal towns turned off their lights, and blackout orders spread along the eastern seaboard. Still, the U-boats attacked. In Washington, officials were stunned. How had the Germans reached so close, so quickly? The U.S. Navy scrambled to find solutions, organizing convoys, deploying aircraft patrols, and building radar systems. But those defenses would take time. Until then, the sea belonged to the hunters. In March 1942, the terror reached a new level. The U-boats began targeting ships that carried refugees, mail, even medical supplies. Nothing was safe. Survivors reported hearing the hiss of torpedoes before the explosion, those few seconds of absolute silence, followed by chaos. Some ships sank so fast that distress calls were never sent. And while the U.S. military fought to respond, ordinary Americans lived with a chilling truth: the war wasn't across the ocean anymore. It was right there, off their beaches. The newspapers stopped printing exact locations of sinkings to avoid helping the enemy. But rumors spread, of submarines surfacing near Cape Hatteras, of German sailors seen through binoculars from shore, of flashing lights out at sea that some believed were enemy signals. Whether true or not, fear ruled the coast. One night, off the coast of Long Island, residents claimed to see an explosion so large that windows rattled miles inland. The next morning, oil washed ashore, along with lifeboats and debris. No one needed confirmation anymore. The war had arrived, and somewhere deep under those same waters, a German U-boat crew listened to the echoes of their success fade into silence. Their captain marked another sinking in his logbook. Then, in the dim red light of the control room, he gave a single order: prepare for the next one. The Atlantic had turned into a battlefield, and America was only beginning to realize how vulnerable it truly was. But the story wasn't over. The hunters were getting closer, and soon, the Americans would fight back. The sun rose over the Atlantic, but the water carried ghosts. Pieces of shattered ships drifted among the waves, oil spread like black glass across the surface, and lifeboats floated silently with no one left inside. The American coastline had turned into a graveyard. By early spring of 1942, the U-boat terror had reached its peak. Ships were burning so close to shore that people could see the flames from their bedroom windows. The air smelled of smoke and diesel. The ocean, once a symbol of peace and beauty, had become a corridor of death. In small towns along the eastern seaboard, panic had replaced comfort. Newspapers were filled with headlines about mysterious explosions at sea, about bodies washing ashore, about entire convoys disappearing. America had been caught off guard. The war wasn't knocking at the door anymore, it was already inside. The German captains, on the other hand, were growing bolder. Their mission, Operation Drumbeat, had turned into a nightmare symphony for the Allies. Each torpedo fired, each ship sunk, felt like another note of victory for Hitler's navy. The U-boat crews celebrated quietly, eating their preserved rations and marking down the kills in the logbooks. One commander wrote in his diary, "The American coast shines like a fairground. Ships pass by with lights on, and we strike 'em down as we please." But something had changed. The Americans were no longer afraid, they were angry. Even as the war continued across the world, in Africa, in the Pacific, in Europe, the U-boat war left a mark that would never fade. The fishermen still found wreckage, pieces of ships that had vanished years before. Sometimes, when the sea was calm and the sun was setting, you could still see the outlines of sunken hulls just below the surface, like ghosts sleeping beneath the waves. The men who survived told stories that haunted them forever, stories of fire on the water, of ships that split in half, of friends who vanished in seconds. For many, the Atlantic would never again be a place of peace. One American sailor, years after the war, said in an interview, "We used to look at the ocean and think it was beautiful. But after that, all I could see were graves." The war beneath the waves had ended, but its echoes never truly stopped. By 1944, the U-boat fleet was nearly destroyed. The Allies had won control of the Atlantic, and the shipping routes to Europe were once again safe. Supplies flowed, soldiers moved, and hope returned. The hunters who had once stalked the coast of America now hid in fear, knowing that every sound could mean death. Some of the surviving U-boat captains surrendered at sea, surfacing with white flags. Others went down with their ships, choosing the ocean over defeat. Their submarines became steel tombs, resting forever in the cold, dark depths. After the war, divers and historians discovered their wrecks, twisted metal, rusted torpedo tubes, and the remains of men who had vanished without trace. On some of those wrecks, the clocks were still frozen at the moment they died. And perhaps the most haunting thing, a few U-boats were found shockingly close to the American coast, some within sight of the shore. The war had truly come that near. For decades, the government kept many of these discoveries quiet. It was easier to forget than to remember how vulnerable the nation had once been. But the evidence was there, deep in the waters off North Carolina, off New Jersey, off New York, silent witnesses to a forgotten invasion. The ocean had kept its promise of silence. In the end, Operation Drumbeat failed to change the outcome of the war. But for a brief, terrifying moment in 1942, the Atlantic wasn't a barrier, it was a battlefield. And the idea that enemy submarines had lurked right outside American harbors changed the way the nation viewed its safety forever. The U-boats had shown the world that no place was too far, no shore too safe, no night too quiet. Even now, divers sometimes descend into those dark, forgotten wrecks, shining flashlights through broken steel corridors, seeing the silent helmets, the rusted control panels, and the haunting emptiness of the captain's chair. It's as if time stopped there, the final heartbeat of a forgotten war beneath the waves. When they resurface, they often say the same thing, that down there, the water feels heavy with memory. You can almost hear the engines that once roared, the torpedoes that once screamed, the shouts of men fighting for breath as the ocean filled their world. It's a reminder that history isn't just written in books, sometimes, it's buried in the sea. And when the light of dawn spreads over the Atlantic now, it looks calm. Peaceful, innocent, even, but beneath that calm blue surface lies another world, one of metal and ghosts, of courage and fear, of men who believed they were invincible until the ocean swallowed them whole. America moved on, the cities along the coast lit up again, the ships sailed freely, and the beaches filled with laughter. But for those who know the story, that peace will always carry an undertone of memory, of a time when German U-boats reached the American coast, and the world realized just how close death could come. So the next time you stand on a beach and stare at the horizon, remember, beneath those waves still rest the echoes of war, the whispers of men who never came home, and the silent reminder that no distance can ever truly keep danger away. Because once, just once, the hunters crossed the sea, and America saw the war reflected in its own waters. Please subscribe my channel and video watch full. Thanks.